Please save all judgment after reading my post. My wife, Marissa, and I were looking to move. That's when we found this house. It was a godsend. It was way below our budget. So much that we didn't hesitate. We just bought the damn thing. It was everything we were looking for, a beautifully built home with enough space for my daughter, Ellie, to play, and extra rooms in case there were any more new family on the way. But the second we stepped into the house, I felt this strong, dark energy. The more I walked around in the house, the heavier it felt. But Marissa and Ellie loved it, so Elle just sucked it up, thinking maybe it was pre-house jitters, if that's even a real thing. It didn't take long for everyone else to start feeling what I had felt though. It first started with Marissa. I woke up one night to some awful noise coming from the kitchen. It sounded rugged, like the blender was crushing ice. No kidding, that was my first f***ing blender. I turned to my side to see if Marissa was awake, but she was gone. That made me nervous. See, Marissa used to sleepwalk when she was younger. Occasionally, she would sleepwalk whenever she had a big meeting coming up or was just super nervous about something. I had to make sure she was okay, so I got out of bed and started to walk down the stairs to see what was going on. When I got down there, I had to hold in my scream. You're not supposed to wake up a sleepwalker. I learned that the hard way. Anyway, when I stepped into the kitchen, Marissa was holding the biggest knife we had and was carving something onto the wall. That's what the noise was. I gently tried to grab the knife, but her grip was tight. It was too tight. There was blood on her hands just from how hard she held the knife. I tried with both hands, but she wouldn't let go. I quickly grabbed a few dish rags from the drawer to see if I could grab the blade instead, but the second I reached for her, she turned the knife on me and started to stab me in the shoulder. I started screaming in pain. That's when Marissa woke up. She was confused at first, but when she saw the bloody knife in her hands and the wound it made, she screamed louder than I did. I put the clean dish rags on the bleeding wound. We woke up Ellie and rushed to the emergency room. Luckily, it wasn't anything major. By the time we got to the ER, the bleeding had stopped. They cleaned it up, gave me 10 stitches, and we got back home before the sun was up. Marissa had put Ellie to bed again before joining me downstairs. I was sitting in the living room, having a stiff glass of bourbon. Marissa, what the fuck happened? I asked. I don't know, she said to me. I was just dreaming, and all of a sudden, there I was, stabbing my husband. Well, what were you dreaming about? She shrugged and said, I don't know. I can't remember anymore. It was the strangest thing though. It was like I could see myself walking down the stairs, pulling out the knife, and just started carving into the wall. It was like I wasn't in control anymore. Like something else was controlling me. The conversation stopped there, so we went to bed, hoping to get a few more hours of sleep. Well, I ended up sick anyway, so I could get more sleep. Marissa and Ellie had left for the day. She wanted to let me sleep in, but also wanted Ellie to avoid the kitchen and the mess that was left behind, which meant it was my job to clean it up. When I returned to the kitchen, I was shocked to see the damage Marissa had left. It must have been 3 feet wide. It looked like a symbol, a circle with lines with an outer ring. Like a peace sign the hippies would wear on their clothes, but turned upside down. And a circle, which I swear to God, made the entire thing look like a person. Whatever it was, it didn't feel peaceful, and I sure as hell didn't like looking at it, so I quickly covered it up. Once it was covered, I was ready to clean off any blood that might have spilled from the accident. But there wasn't any blood, none, not even the knife she stabbed me with. It confused me, but I just figured that Marissa cleaned it up last night, or maybe I did, but somehow forgot. I just shrugged it off, one less thing to clean. A few weeks later, another weird thing happened, but this time it was Ellie. Marissa and I were in bed, and all of a sudden, Ellie started screaming bloody murder. We rushed out of our room and busted through Ellie's door. And there she was, just sleeping in bed. I tell you, that kid could sleep through anything, but I thought for sure she would have woken up. Fear flowed into my bloodstream. She should have been awake. I feared that my child was dead, so I started to nudge her, maybe a little too aggressively, and started to shout her name. Marissa had to pull me away, and right on cue, Ellie's little blue eyes peeked over at us. She was indeed alive. Marissa and I returned to our room, and she was livid. "What the hell was that?" she asked. "Did you not hear her screaming? But we just found her sleeping like a rock." "What the hell was that?" I remember saying to her. "What scream?" "I only bolted out the door because you did. I had no idea why. Then you break her door open and just start shaking her like a man," my wife said with conviction. "So, you didn't hear her scream?" "No," she yelled. "I'm going back to sleep. We can talk about this in the morning." I was completely in shock that she didn't hear Ellie scream. I could still hear it echoing in my ears even now. I had never felt so scared. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just lay there, replaying the events over and over. A lot of crazy shit happened in the last month. We all started to hear whispering, furniture was getting moved around, and we started to see things bloody, graphic, horrible things. But the most f***ed up thing that happened was when Ellie found our cat, Mr. Jingles, one morning. Poor thing was skinned alive, and was just hanging on the fence, his tail slid between the fence posts. It took us an hour to get him off. We ended just cutting the tail off. That was hard on Ellie. All of it was hard for her. The things we were experiencing, it was too much for a child. She became a different person. All the joy from her life was getting drained. It broke our hearts seeing her like this. We knew we had to move, sell the house, and get Ellie some help. What I'm about to tell you happened just 2 nights ago. We were asleep, and then Marissa and I woke up to Ellie screaming. This time, I looked at her, and we shared the same fearful look. We got out of bed as fast as we could and went to Ellie's room. She was still screaming. I tried the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. It wasn't like it was locked. It felt like someone, or something, was holding it from the other side. "Ellie, sweetie? Please let go of the door. We want to help," I said. No response except her screaming. Then Marissa tried, "Ellie, please, let go of the door." And then, we heard another voice. I don't think I'll ever forget it. It didn't sound like a normal voice. It was deep, really deep. Gravelly, raspy, but also piercing, like the bass notes of an electro-theremin. I can't even think about it without getting nauseous. But it was perfectly clear. We both heard the voice bellow out, "No!" Marissa and I didn't know what to think. We looked at each other terrified. I tried to bust through the door, but it wouldn't budge. I tried and tried until my arm got sore. I finally looked at Marissa and asked her to help, and with both of us using all our strength, we finally broke in. I turned on the lights, and then, we saw the thing. I can't even describe it. There, standing at the foot of Ellie's bed, was this tall, black creature. It darker than darkness, and its body moved like ink flowing through water. The skin, if you could even call it that, was almost amphibious the way the light was reflecting off of it. The body was covered in these different-sized lumps, which would bubble and pop like a pot of water boiling over. It had these long, blade-like fingers. But the thing that keeps circulating in my nightmares was its face, or lack of one. This thing, standing mighty with the build of a 10-foot linebacker, just stared at us with no eyes, no facial expression, no facial features. We were just staring back out into nothing. I stood, like a statue, completely still. I didn't have a single clue what it was. I was just frozen in fear. Marissa screamed right in my ear, and I think that broke me out of my trance. But before I could do anything, I watched as the thing raised its hand like a shoe motion. Marissa and I went flying out of the room, down the stairs, breaking through the guardrails, and collapsing to the ground floor. Marissa landed on the dining table while I landed on the hardwood floors. One of the broken pieces of a rail had pierced my lower back and was still sticking out. I pulled it out, whimpering in pain. Next thing I remembered was looking back up to the second floor, and there it was, the black figure. It floated towards us, its body rippling with each stride. I watched it approach me, and with another flick of its wrist, it sent me flying into the living room. The power, the force it had, it pushed everything in front of it. I landed hard again, this time on my back. My legs went numb. I had to drag myself up so I could see the thing again, and that's when I saw it looking at Marissa. She was unconscious on the table. She didn't even see it. I watched it grab her legs and dragged her closer. Then that thing grabbed her by the waist, then turned and faced me. It was like it wanted me to watch. I told you that I didn't think it had a mouth, but I was wrong. It didn't have lips, but it sure as fuck had a mouth. That thing stretched out a wide opening and revealed an impossibly long throat. It must have been a mile long. Its long, red, pointed tongue flopped out of its mouth to reveal the walls of its throat. Its throat was lined with these razor-like shark teeth that were circulating in rows, moving like the inside of a pencil sharpener. Then, it started to eat her. Marissa snapped out of her daze and screamed. She pleaded, cried, and tried to break free, but it was pointless. That thing was grinding her up like a wood chipper, all of her flesh and bones just draining down that thing's throat. It shredded her legs and got to just about where her stomach was, then it just dropped her upper half right onto the dining table. Her insides started spilling out. She looked so limp, so lifeless. She was fucking dead. And then, it turned to me, and that fucking thing grinned at me. And Ellie? Well, I'm glad I wasn't conscious to see what it did to her. I must have blacked out because all I remembered was that fucking smile, and then it was morning. I remember waking up on the floor, still sore from the night before. It was a gentle reminder of the horrors I endured. As I got up, I saw that the house was destroyed. I looked at Marissa's her upper half, all the way from the living rooms. She was still on top of our dining table, but there wasn't any blood, it had disappeared. When I got closer to her, I saw her eyes were missing. It took her fucking eyes. I knew I had to check on Ellie, and as I looked up those stairs, I became terrified. With each step I took, I felt like I was going to throw up. I was so scared, not about that fucking thing, but about Ellie. I didn't want to know what happened to her, but at the same time, I needed to know. When I got to her room, I screamed and started punching the walls. She was lying on top of her bed dead. Her eyes were gone, just like Marissa's. But unlike Marissa, Ellie's chest was ripped open, her rib cage was sticking out of her skin, and I saw the innards of my child displayed in front of me. The only thing missing was her little heart. I cried hard, it was all hitting me. My family was dead. Okay. That's it. That's my story. I don't expect you to believe me, because why would you? It doesn't matter. I'm not a liar. I know what I went through. But if you believe me, please know there is real evil in this world. It's not for jokes, guys. I'm so scared. But it's time. Now if you'll excuse me, it's time I return to my family. James and I were happy, or at least, I thought we were, when he proposed. I believed I'd found the person who would finally pull me from the shadows that had haunted me since my father's death. But it didn't take long after the wedding for the cracks to show. James had always spoken about his mother with an intensity that bordered on disturbing, but I brushed it off as grief. She had died a few years ago, and he still carried that loss like a wound that never healed. When he insisted we move into her old house, I hesitated. There was something unsettling about it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but James was adamant. "It's our home now," he said, his voice soft yet firm. I agreed, wanting to support him, to be the understanding wife. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew I'd made a mistake. The house was suffocating. It reeked of dust and mildew, the air thick with decay and something else, something rotten. The walls seemed to close in on me as soon as we entered, and the dark corners of each room felt like they were watching me, waiting. That first night, I struggled to sleep. James left the bedroom door ajar and whispered, "Good night, Mommy," into the darkness. His voice was childlike, a strange, eerie tone that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to him, expecting to see a hint of humor in his eyes, but there was none. He was serious, his face blank, almost vacant. I wanted to ask him about it, but fear kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to know the answer. The days turned into a nightmare. Every attempt I made to change or decorate the house was met with resistance. "Mommy wouldn't approve," James would say, his tone flat and lifeless. It wasn't just a phrase, he believed it. The house was a shrine, untouched and unchangeable, a monument to his mother that I was forbidden to alter. The first time something truly terrifying happened, I was alone in the kitchen. I heard a voice, a soft, hissing whisper, calling my name. "Sarah." It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably real. I spun around, but the room was empty. My heart pounded as I searched the house, finding nothing but silence. I tried to tell James, but he brushed it off, his eyes darkening with something I couldn't place. "You shouldn't be afraid," he said. "She's just trying to get to know you." That night, I lay awake, staring at the door James had once again left slightly open. I heard it again, the same voice, closer this time. "Sarah, you don't belong here." The air in the room grew colder, the shadows deepened. I felt her before I saw her, a figure, tall and thin, standing just beyond the door. Her face was hidden in the darkness, but I could feel her eyes on me, burning with hatred. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed with fear. Then she was gone, the room plunging into an unnatural stillness. The next day, I found the diary. It was hidden in the attic, beneath a pile of dusty, moth-eaten clothes. My hands shook as I opened it, the pages brittle and yellowed with age. It belonged to James's mother, and as I read, a sense of dread clawed at my insides. The early entries were mundane, the ramblings of a lonely woman who had lost her husband and devoted herself entirely to her only child. But as I read on, the tone shifted. Her words grew more possessive, more desperate. She wrote about James in ways that made my skin crawl, how no one else could love him the way she did, how he was hers and hers alone. There were entries about her touching him, about the way he responded, confused and frightened, but always obedient. And then, there were the rituals. Dark, twisted rituals, to bind them together forever. She wrote about blood, about how she made him promise to never leave her, how she would make sure they were never apart, even in death. As I read, a realization struck me, a horrible, gut-wrenching truth. She had never really left. The house was her tomb, her prison, and she wasn't alone. She had kept James with her, trapped in her twisted love, and now she was turning her attention to me. That night, the house came alive with horrors. The walls groaned and shifted. The floors creaked under the weight of unseen footsteps. I heard whispers, not just one voice now, but many, all hissing my name, all telling me to leave, to run, to get out before it was too late. But where could I go? The door was locked, the windows sealed. I was trapped. In the bedroom. James was waiting. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something close to madness. "She's here," he whispered, a smile twisting his lips. "She's always been here. And now, she wants you." I backed away, but there was nowhere to run. The shadows moved, swirling around me, and I saw her again, standing in the doorway. This time, she was clearer, her face gaunt and hollow, her eyes black pits of rage. She reached out, her fingers like claws, and I felt her cold touch on my skin, pulling me, dragging me toward her. James watched, his expression unreadable, as she leaned in close, her breath icy against my ear. "You'll never take him from me," she hissed. "He's mine, forever." The next morning, I woke up alone. The room was cold, the bed empty. I could still feel her touch, still hear her voice in my head. James was gone, and I was alone in the house with her. The door was locked, the windows sealed, and I knew I couldn't escape. I'm writing this now, though I don't know why. Maybe someone will find it, maybe not. But if you do, know that this house is cursed. She's here, And she's never leaving. Neither will I. And James? I don't know where he is, but I hear him sometimes, crying in the dark, calling for his mother. Maybe that's where he's always been. Maybe that's where he'll always be.